London, summer of 1944. The sky hums with a sound no one can mistake. A pulsing engine, low and mechanical, growing louder by the second. You look up. A strange black shape crosses the clouds, trailing fire from its tail. It is not a plane. It has no pilot. It is a flying bomb, and it is falling toward your street. Sirens wail across rooftops that have already survived years of bombing raids. Anti-aircraft guns erupt across the city, shell after shell exploding in the air, filling the sky with smoke and noise. Most of them miss. The bomb keeps coming, steady and unbothered, as if the explosions around it mean nothing at all. For weeks, this happens again and again, thousands of times, over the rooftops of Britain. Families count the seconds after the engine cuts out, waiting to hear where it lands. Children are taught to listen for the silence, the moment the buzzing stops, because that silence means the bomb has begun to fall. Newspapers do not print the true numbers, afraid of what panic the truth might cause among people already exhausted by years of war. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the official statements, military planners quietly admit something far worse than anyone outside the room realizes. Their best guns, their best radar, their best trained crews are barely scratching the problem. Thousands of shells fired, and the sky above London is still not safe. The strangest part is not the bomb itself, it is how helpless the world's most advanced armies seem against it. Something is missing. Something no general, no engineer, no gunner has yet figured out how to build. By the summer of 1944, anti-aircraft crews around London are firing everything they have at these unmanned V-1 bombs, and the numbers are brutal. Shells cost money, time, and steel, and most of them explode uselessly in empty sky, far from the target they were meant to destroy. A single hit requires a shell to burst within a few dozen feet of an object moving nearly 400 miles an hour, appearing without warning and gone again in seconds. The standard method depends on timed fuses, small mechanical clocks set before firing, calculated from the enemy's estimated speed, altitude, and direction. One tiny miscalculation, and the shell detonates too early, too late, or too far away to matter at all. General Frederick Pyle, commanding Britain's anti-aircraft defenses, watches his crews burn through ammunition with barely any results to show for it. His gunners are exhausted, firing around the clock, tracking targets that never slow down and never change course to make a shot easier. Every failed barrage means another bomb reaching a street, a factory, a row of houses that had nothing to do with the war being fought over their heads. Across the ocean, physicists at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, led by a driven scientist named Merle Tuve, have spent years chasing a different kind of answer. Not a better gun, not a faster gunner. Something that could sense the enemy itself, without a human ever pulling a trigger at exactly the right instant. For years, the idea sounds almost impossible. How do you fit awareness into a piece of metal fired out of a cannon at over 20,000 times the force of gravity? Vacuum tubes shatter under stress like that. Batteries crack. Delicate radios simply do not survive the violence of cannon fire. Every prototype breaks apart. Every early test ends in silence, or in an explosion far from where it should have happened. The war grinds on through 1943 and into 1944. The bombs keep falling over London. British engineers try adjusting radar tracking, hoping better calculations alone will close the gap. American ordnance officers ship over more shells, more guns, more crews, hoping raw volume will finally solve what precision cannot. None of it is enough. Reports from the front describe barrages that fill the sky with smoke, yet still let bombs through untouched. And still, almost no one outside a small, secretive American laboratory knows the answer already exists, sealed inside a shell too small to notice and too strange to believe was real. For years, brilliant minds tried to outcalculate the sky, betting everything on timing, arithmetic, and human reflexes under pressure. But the real answer was never a smarter calculation. It was a tiny, hidden transmitter, small enough to fit inside a shell casing, quietly listening as it flew. Engineers at Johns Hopkins had built something almost unbelievable, a miniature radio set, packed into the nose of an artillery shell, powered by a small generator that spun to life the instant the shell was fired from the gun. As it flew toward its target, this radio constantly sent out signals and listened for their echo bouncing back. When that echo grew strong enough, meaning the shell had closed in near the enemy, a circuit inside triggered detonation automatically, at exactly the right distance. No clock ticking down blindly. No guesswork about speed or altitude. No need for a gunner to predict where a plane would be 3 seconds into the future. The shell decided the perfect moment for itself, mid-flight, alone in the sky. This was the proximity fuse, nicknamed the VT fuse, short for variable time. It turned an ordinary artillery shell into something closer to a sensor than a bullet. And it worked whether the target was a fast unmanned bomb, a diving aircraft, or a soldier crouched somewhere in the open below. Building it meant solving problems that sounded almost absurd on paper. Every component had to survive being slammed forward at a force that would crush a human body instantly, then keep working perfectly for the few seconds of flight that followed. Engineers tested tube after tube, shell after shell, tossing failed designs aside for years before one finally held together long enough to matter. This single invention, quiet and unglamorous, sitting inside a metal tube no bigger than a bottle, would quietly reshape the direction of the entire war. Once cleared for combat use, the VT fuse transformed the fight against the V-1 bombs almost overnight. Gun crews around London who had spent months missing bomb after bomb suddenly found their kill rate climbing sharply, week after week, as the new fuses reached their batteries near the coast. By the final stretch of the V-1 campaign, the vast majority of bombs entering range of VT-equipped guns were being destroyed before they ever reached the city. But Britain's skies were only the beginning of the story. In the Pacific, American ships facing endless waves of kamikaze attacks needed a way to destroy incoming planes fast, without depending on a perfect shot from a nervous gunner. Naval crews loaded VT-fused shells into their anti-aircraft batteries, and suddenly a near miss was enough to bring a plane down before impact. Ships that had been overwhelmed by suicide attacks gained a defense that no longer depended on human timing under total chaos. Captains who had watched helplessly as planes dove through their barrages now saw those same planes shattered in midair, sometimes hundreds of yards short of impact, before they ever reached the deck. On land, the effect was just as dramatic. During the brutal winter of the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, American artillery crews used VT-fused shells to create airbursts, shells exploding automatically above German infantry caught in open fields and forests, showering them with shrapnel from directly overhead instead of the ground. Soldiers who had learned to survive artillery for years by diving into foxholes suddenly found that shelter no longer worked the same way. General George Patton reportedly called it one of the most important developments of the entire war, powerful enough that Allied command initially forbade its use over enemy territory, afraid that even a single dud shell might fall into German hands and hand over the secret design. It stayed locked away for naval and defensive use only, until the danger of losing that secret finally mattered less than the lives it could save on frozen battlefields. Once released for ground combat in late 1944, entire divisions noticed the difference within days. Commanders who had rationed traditional shells for years suddenly had a weapon that made nearly every barrage more lethal than the one before it. Some historians would later argue that no single piece of technology did more to shorten the ground war in Western Europe during its final, brutal winter of fighting. Today, most people walking past a war memorial or watching a documentary about D-Day have never once heard the words proximity fuse. No film has been made about the physicists hunched over vacuum tubes in a quiet Maryland laboratory. No monument marks the shells that silently decided, mid-flight, exactly when to explode above a battlefield. There were no medals given for the metal itself, only for the men who fired it. Yet the same basic idea, a machine sensing its target and reacting without a human hand guiding that final second, sits today inside radar altimeters, guided munitions, airbag sensors, and the collision detectors in cars driving past your window right now. It hides inside phones that sense a falling drop, inside drones that know when to slow down, inside 1,000 small devices no one thinks to trace back to a shell fired over London 8 decades ago. The bomb that once fell silently over London was not stopped by a braver soldier or a luckier shot. It was stopped by a tiny circuit that simply listened and knew precisely when to act. The war was not won by any single weapon alone, but this hidden one, invisible and unglamorous, quietly tipped battles that history now remembers by entirely different names. Think back to that summer sky over London, the bombs falling, the guns firing blindly into empty air. It was not courage alone that finally closed that gap. It was a whisper of radio waves, hidden inside a piece of metal, deciding in a fraction of a second when the moment had arrived. Look closely enough at any famous triumph, and somewhere inside it, something small was listening the whole time, waiting for its one exact moment.